down? I want to go down, control down, shift down. Okay, we can just do it like that. I'm just looking at the agenda if we have all the presenters here. So, yeah, Danny is here. Sorry, yeah, saw you. So I think we're good to go. So all the presenters are here. It's 10 a.m. Welcome to the ALTO working group. Yeah, this is my co-chair, Vijay Gobani, and we are very happy. This has been a long time that we've been able to chair this together. So this is, I don't know when the last time was we chaired this together.
I think it was
physically. I mean,
Georgia or something, many years ago.
Many years ago. many years ago. But yeah, so we're happy that we can both be here. And yeah, let's start. So we do have somebody monitoring Java, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Great. Just in case if somebody speaks up, just go to the mic, please. And we do have note takers. Who are the note takers? Jensen. Ah, yeah, we have a note taker. Great. So I think we are all good to go. Just a reminder, I think everybody in the room knows this. This is an IETF. This is the IETF policy, basically. So everything here is public domain, and there are certain IPR rules. So please take a look if you don't know about this. But we just, yeah, we want to inform you that these rules apply here. And there are certain RFCs that state these rules. So what is the status of our working group? This slide is actually not much different than from last time. We are focusing on finishing our milestones, and we chairs have been sticking to that point for quite some time now. And again, we have put up the agenda today accordingly. So we will have all the working group items that address milestones first. And then in the end, we have 2 more presentations on you know, additional stuff that we can discuss how to handle it. But most of the agenda is for the milestones. So in order to make progress, Vijay and I have agreed that the remaining drafts after today's meeting, we hope that we can move some out of the working group even today. But the remaining ones, we will split amongst ourselves, and we will individually ping the authors to make progress by the November IETF, so we can really progress. So we will do that after this session, and then basically you will, if you're an author of a working group item that is not done, expect frequent mails from the chairs. Hey, what's the status? Hey, what's the status? Yeah, sure.
So I think we have 7 drafts that we are working on. Out of those 7, 3 should be going out to IESG, XDOM, Cost Calendar, and there's SSE. So that leaves 4 of them, and Jan and I will take 2 each and start hounding you guys to finish it.
Yes, and another thing, and it's good that Miriam is arriving because that's something we can also discuss with her. Currently, there is no meeting planned for Singapore because Vijay and I both cannot make it. What I think we've discussed with Miriam already is that we can, again, do a virtual interim. But during this week, we had another option came up. If some of you guys, and we talked to Sabine already, and if somebody else wants to temporarily chair the working group just for the Singapore meeting, because lots of people will be there, that's something we can certainly discuss. We don't have to discuss it now. We can take it offline with Mirja. I don't know how you feel about it. It was just, you know, both of us cannot be there, but if all the other folks are going to be there, maybe, you know, somebody can share the working just for the Singapore meeting. You have any opinions, Mirja? That's fine, right? We can do that.
Yeah, I would like to have you remotely participating at least.
Yes.
You guys.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Participate remotely.
Of course. Yeah,
but
sure.
Like somebody who can sit in the front and you know, hit the buttons. That
We will do all the agenda collection and uploading everything. It's just for somebody to physically be in the room. Yeah.
Right. But we don't have to decide this today. We can take this offline on the mailing list, and just so you know, it's basically both. Those are the options. So we definitely going to have a meeting, either a virtual interim or a Singapore meeting where somebody is chairing instead of us, and we will be logging in remotely. Yeah, so the agenda has been posted, and as I said, the agenda is pretty straightforward because we're going to discuss the milestones first, and then we have the last 2 presentations are on non-milestone stuff, so we put that at the end, and I hope we will have time for that. Does anybody want to comment on the agenda? Anything? No? Okay. I think we posted it a long time ago. I mean, almost a week or something. Yeah. So should be good. Yeah, progress. We had a meeting in Prague where basically we made some progress. So just so you know the general status, we have, I think, 7 working group items, like Vijay just said. And the first 3 you see here on the sub-bullets are almost done. So XDOM is already in ISG processing. They received some comments. I had a lunch with Sebastian last week in Stuttgart, and basically they addressed these comments and just issued a new version. So now the ball is in the ISG court again. So sometimes this happens. You kick it to the ISG, they have some discussions, and you need to reiterate. I don't know, Mirja, if you had the chance to, I think we wanted to talk with one of the ADs, right?
Yeah, so one discuss was already resolved, and there's another discuss which probably just needs some button clicking again. But I also need to look at it, so it's mainly on me now, actually.
Okay, yeah. So where the main point is, it's making progress, right? So it's out of the working group anyway. And on cost calendar, we finished yet another second working group last call. We have a presentation from Sabine on the remaining issues, but I discussed with her yesterday, they're very few. So we are very hopeful that this is basically done now. I think there are just some typos and small issues that Sabine's going to fix, and then we can kick the new version out of the working group. So that's done. And actually, almost the same status as the SSE draft. Richard uploaded a new version, and we will have no presentation on this today because basically last time we already agreed it's pretty much done. So just from a process perspective, once, as soon as possible, we issue another working group last call because Richard posted a new version. So people have 2 weeks to comment on it, but I don't expect anything there. And we certainly don't need any reviewers for that second working group last call. We've done all that. So that means 4 other working group items are remaining, and we have presentations on each of these, and the focus is basically what's missing for working group last call. I have just a short summary, but this is basically what I just said already. Cross-domain is under ISG evaluation. Cost calendar is pretty much done. I just said that. SSE is the same. We will not have a presentation, but basically we're going to have a second working group last call. CDN FCI, Jensen will present. We had a meeting yesterday also with all the authors. I personally think, being a co-author with my chair head off, this is very mature, and if you look at it, I think it's already 40 pages, lots of code examples, JSON examples. It should be good. One thing that I think came up to my mind yesterday is once we do a working group last call on this document, we should also inform the CDNI working group. Because remember, this was kicked from the CDNI working group to our working group. In theory, we are just doing the transport protocol, and the CDNI semantics have not changed. Right, so the JSON object specified, we specifically discussed that with the co-authors yesterday. There is RFC 8008, which I'm a co-author, and that has been finished, and that defines the JSON format, and we're not touching that. So we're just transporting that format. So in theory, the CDNI working group should not have a problem with it, but just to be fair, we're going to kick it, we're going to inform them. And I'm always saying in theory, you never know. Maybe they have some comments and we need to address them. We will have to see. Right, and this is the remaining documents. We have performance metrics where, we have to see today during Richard's presentation how close it is to working group last call. I talked to Richard yesterday, unified properties and path vector. Remember, these go as a bundle because they're dependencies. And I think path vector is more mature than unified properties, but Richard will present on that. But let's see. Again, our question as chairs is how close is it to working group last call? So that's our quick summary on the status. Are there any other comments, any other business? Okay. If not, Vijay, you want to?
So yeah, Kai, you're the first speaker. So please get yourself situated on Meet Echo. And for those of you that came in late and haven't signed the blue sheets, please do so. That said, I think we can start with Kai's presentation.
Yes. So that's the Meet Echo laptop over there.
I think we have to start it here.
Did you register?
Yes, I think we do.
Then the Meet Echo should just start.
Say again?
The Meet Echo team should even in.
Okay. Yeah, so all I know is Meet Echo is aware, and there's been email exchange, and he should
I
be.
think he should request presentation. He should press something.
Okay, Kai, if you're listening, can you maybe look on your Meet Echo and request permission to start presentation?
Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to find out. Where's the slide that go?
Because they're watching on the streams, but they don't listen to the audio.
Okay, and the slides, we forgot to upload the slides?
No, they're there. Path vector, right?
No, it's
Path vector.
oh, it is path vector. Press.
All right, Kai, can you start? Lorenzo, can you coordinate to see if Kai can start presenting? Otherwise, we move on to the next one and come back to Kai in the end.
Right.
Is somebody in Java?
Yes,
Yeah.
somebody's watching.
Yeah, it says, please tell Kai to just the mic icon.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Kai, can you click on the mic button?
Yeah, I think I have clicked on mic. But does it work now?
We hear you, that's good. Yeah, okay, so we don't see you, but we hear you. I think that's good enough.
Oh, great.
So we can hear you, and just go ahead and say next slide, and then we will move to the next slide.
Yep, sure. Thanks. So good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to give some updates of the path vector extension. So next slide, please. So this page basically gives an overview of the updates we have made in the last two revisions. Basically, since last IETF meeting, we have bumped two versions. So in the 07 version, we've finalized the specification and also made some changes to the references. Regarding the specifications, we revert the cost type design back to the one we used in 05. And we add a new IRD capability and request field to negotiate properties. And we also add a new property to support some use cases other than code flow scheduling. And in the latest revision, we focus more on the clarification of some concepts and also with more use cases. So next slide, please. So this page summarizes the changes we made to the cost type design. So in 05, we use array as a cost mode and ANE path as a cost metric. In 05, it's changed slightly different, where path vector used as a cost mode, and we only include one property for the cost metric. And since 07, we changed back to the one we used in 05. Basically, this cost type better conforms to the auto cost type design principle, where the mode represents the interpretation of the value and the metric means the semantics. So next slide, please. We also clarify the property negotiation process for the path vector. In 05, property query is handled by the unified property map extension, basically in an individual query. And in 06, we have merged the two responses into a single one. So, but we only left one property to be queried, and it is encoded as a cost metric. And since 07, we have introduced the following mechanisms. First, available properties are announced in an IRD entry capability, and the client must submit selected properties in the query. And basically, this process mimics the negotiation process of cost types. So in the next page, we give an example of how what the changes look like. So on the left-hand side, in the IRD capabilities, we add a new capability called ANE properties, and it is defined as an array of property names for the ANE domain. And on the right-hand side, we add a new field to the filter that is submitted by a client, which is also named ANE properties, and it is an array of selected properties by the client. So next page, please. We have also introduced a new property to in 07. Basically, it is called persistent entity. It is an array of entity identifiers that are persistent in the scope of an auto server. So when it is not present, it is treated as an empty list. So the motivation for this new property is it allows clients to query further information related to entities discovered by path vector, and it enables applications such as in-network cache planning. And in contrast to ANE, which is dynamically generated and specific to the query, persistent entities can be used to query related properties in another unified property map or some other auto resources. So in the next page, please. And in this page, we give an example of how the persistent entity works. First, the related entity must be exported by another unified property map. For example, we use a domain called HTTP proxy here. This proxy is not formally registered, but so we only use it for this example. And in the unified property map, we claim that this unified property map can provide properties called price for this HTTP proxy, where the price means, for example, dollars per gigabyte stored on the proxy. And then this resource should be used by a path vector resource to indicate that this entity is exported from this from the used from the property map indicate in the user's capabilities. And then in the ANE properties, the server can announce persistent entities as available property. So in the next page, so in the next page, we give an example of what the persistent entities returns. So it returns an entity identifier of the HTTP proxy domain. So here we basically still using an IP address for this entity identifier, but it could be, for example, a domain name or a host name. So basically, this is a newly introduced property. So in the next page,
Go ahead, Kai.
in the next page, sorry, I think the connection is temporarily lost. So this page gives an overview of the clarification text we have made to the draft. In the 07, the three sections, introduction, overview, and motivation, basically is built around the requirement of the path vector design and how the extension addresses the requirements, and also the code flow use case. And since in the latest revision, we try to clarify the importance of the perspective extension in two aspects. So first, it can be used to support new usage scenarios, and also it provides fundamentally different information, basically the correlation of network path. And the base protocol provides preferences of network path. I think this better clarifies the necessity of the path vector extension. And in the overview section, we give a top-down exploration of the design space and design decision justifications. So here are three most critical issues. For example, why do we encode the information in a single message? Basically, it is for like server scalability or other concerns. And we also give some other details. And also we
Kai, you there?
I think we lost him. Kai? Montreal to Kai? Yeah. So since the slides are, I mean, he was mostly done. I'm looking at, well, not mostly.
Yeah, it sounds like he can hear us, but.
Hello.
There he is back.
Great.
Okay, but Kai, I also would like to remind you to speed up a little because we have a couple more presentations today. So maybe you can go over the remaining slides a bit quicker also.
Yeah, sure, of course.
5 minutes.
Okay, so in the next page, we basically fix an issue, which is in the latest SEC draft. It uses a different mechanism as we mentioned in the path vector extension. So basically, we fix the issue with a new concept called part resource ID. So this part resource ID is also used in the 0.7 version, but not defined individually. So basically, we made some clarification. So in the next slide, we describe the two usages of the path resource part resource ID. So it is used in the path vector response to indicate the resource redundancy, and in the SCC update stream to demultiplex updates for the two resources returned by the path vector. So in the next two slides, we basically give example of the part resource ID. So maybe we can just skip the examples. And so in the next slide, we basically talk about the compatibility issue with cost calendar. In the 0.7 version, the integration with cost calendar is left as a discussion. Basically, the conclusion is it is left as a future requirement. So in the latest revision, we looked back to the question, and I think even with the current design, the cost calendar extension can be used directly with the path vector extension, with one requirement that the same abstract network element in different time intervals with different properties must be treated as different ANEs. And if an auto server enforces this requirement,
Okay, looks like we lost you again because we can't hear you. Richard, if you are aware of this, can you just...
I think
Right, go to the
conclusion?
pretty clear.
So Kai, we went to the conclusion slide. Can you try one more time? Well, it doesn't seem to work, but I mean, we can see the conclusions here, and maybe that's a good time to open the discussion, or maybe ask the other co-authors who are here. So I see what I read from this is you did a lot of work. You moved this forward, and you don't have any outstanding issues anymore. Correct, Richard? There are no any.
Yeah, Richard. Yeah.
Not any-
So only one thing is the following, and I think the only change which will not make is for the final version of SSE, which we just uploaded a few days ago, and we changed the name from client ID to called substream ID. So it's
Yeah, but that's an editorial thing. That's not
it's
a
very
design
small
decision.
thing, right? Not content.
Right.
I think that's the only change.
Okay, but actually, I would say for that we don't even need a new version. We do that after the working glass call, right? If there's just a name change in SSE, just as long as you have it on you don't forget about it. So the other question is, we agreed that we would move these two together, path vector and unified properties. But Richard, you're more the expert. Shall we go for a working glass call on this one and say it's done and then wait for unified properties, or shall we wait? I mean.
Yeah, I think we probably should wait until we see the unified property, and then we can make a decision to see if they both.
Yeah, then we
go or
postpone
not.
this. I mean, you mean during today's session we can.
Yeah, during today's session, we can-
Okay,
we
then
can
let's postpone the
assess.
discussion for a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Right?
So the only other comment which I want to make is, right now I think Kai and I we had a quite long discussion, I think like 2 days ago, and because right now the path vector there's one use case about I think I also talked to Sabine yesterday I believe as well, and because there's one major use case which is right now already in the state of getting truly deployed by the DOE by like 4 very large LHC LKC. And there are some like 3 use cases and time block and several ones, and which potentially I think he talked about integration with a cost calendar. That's probably related. So I don't recommend at all we make a change to this document to really integrate it. But I do recommend that the authors, and including Kai as the main author, and also Sabine cost calendar, to take a look to see if we might even like low hanging fruit, just even address it very quickly. I believe they can be addressed in the same thing.
I agree with all that, but maybe they can also do that during a working glass call.
Yes, I believe
So
so.
I'm just trying to speed up the process, not for every small issue. Yeah. So maybe when we start the working group last call officially on the list, once we do that, you can remind the other course calendar authors and stuff to check for these kinds of things.
So just to make sure, because cost calendar has been through the WGLC, so there's no impact on cost calendar itself, correct?
No, supposedly not. And basically, cost calendar will be stable as it is. And the only use case is I was essentially pushed by a couple, essentially CERN and DOE, Department of Energy people. See, you check it, see if it can be really used or not.
Okay, sounds good. So then we come back to WGLC after unified properties?
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
we do that discussion afterwards. But generally, to summarize, also for the notes, our understanding now is that all design decisions and technical issues have been resolved. Lots of work, only super minor editorial issues, and some clarifications with other draft authors that they can make during working glass calls. So it's done from our perspective. But let's wait because it depends on unified properties how we move forward. Okay.
Cool.
Great.
Then Richard, you're up next. Yeah, and you have this. Let me put up your slides.
Great. I hope that it's a real world, so therefore I can really speak and without being interrupted. Okay. It's performance metrics final slide. I think I upload a couple versions.
No way, Richard. You uploaded versions on short notice before the meeting?
I think it
Never happened before.
because I did make a
No way.
small edit. Right, you can see that it's like a final version from.
I think the
From the
tool should
title.
always
Oh,
have
last one.
final.
Last one. Go down. Yeah, final slides.
Okay.
Final slides.
Yeah, I gave a title change.
Now the final.
So if you keep the title the same, it'll just keep on upload, you know.
Oh, makes sense.
Yeah, so that's why I suggested putting the version number in your slides.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so let me get started. I'll talk about auto performance metrics, and it's version 7. And here is a list of our co-authors, and we indeed actually have quite some extensive discussions in the last couple of days. And I think even today, we're going to talk to some experts from IPPM, I believe. Let's see, let me talk about, okay, and here is outline of changes we made in this most recent version. Oh, okay. So, and for today, and mostly I'll talk about updates we have made from 06 to 07. And I do want to talk about one remaining issue, actually not really remaining issues, mainly a single remaining issue, which we want to engage the whole working group who can discuss. Hopefully we can make a final decision. And then we'll talk about plan for next step. Depends on the discussion on the working group discussion item. Okay. Oh, should I control? Oh.
No, I think I'm doing it wrong, but I'm trying.
Oh, okay.
You can try if you can control it with your
Really?
clicker.
I can?
Yeah.
Can I
Do
try?
it like this. Yeah, let's do it like this.
Can you control
I
it?
cannot. I don't believe so. Okay,
No,
you're the boss. Okay. So, and here is the really overview of the updates we have made from version 6 to version 7.
This works though,
Oh, it works now.
if you want.
Oh, the pointer. Okay, yes, I can use the pointer. And so basically, and we have made 2 types of changes. And type number 1 is we indeed make quite a lot of structural changes, not really content, because we feel that this is better to clarify the idea. And in particular, if for people who can really read, I know it's like they're a little bit small. And a major structure change is section 2 from there. And left-hand side is version 6. Right-hand side is section is version 7, the newest version. So what we did was from the essentially the operations, the challenges, and so on. We put at the very beginning up front and beginning to talk about all the changes and so on. And later we realized that's probably too much diversion and for the readers. So therefore, for the newer version, we moved it into the newer version, a newer section called section 4, and we renamed it called operational considerations. So therefore, that's one major change from here and to here. And the second major structural change is we indeed make a lot of structural changes on section 2, which is essentially the bulk part, the main technical part of this draft. And we're mostly trying to define the performance metrics and in a different structure. So which actually is the main focus of today's discussion. Of course, we also made a lot of small text changes as well, and which I would not want to go to the details. Okay, can you go to the next slide, please? So here is, let me talk about why we make the structure changes from version 6 to version 7. And left-hand side is the basic structure for every performance metric we define for each auto performance metric. Essentially, you can see that we define metric name, description, and method of measurement or calculation, and units, and measurement points with potential measurement domains, and timing, and use and applications. So basically, this I believe is mostly it comes from template of the IPPM. But on the other hand, and if you look at essentially the base protocol of Auto, which is RFC 7285, and here is the cost metric registry part, a section part of that base protocol. And it says that if you define an essentially this auto cost metric registry, and you must really provide the following information. Number 1, what's the identifier? And number 2, and what's the intended semantics? And intended semantics really talk about basically how it's being utilized, and document, and lower value is better, and what's the measurement units, and so on, and then to talk about security considerations. So that's the structure of Auto, essential structure, and here is the structure of the IPPM, and therefore actual authors have quite a lot of discussions. Eventually we decided that essentially they are really auto performance metrics. We probably should eventually really restructure to really follow the Auto 7285 structure. So next slide, please. So this is essentially the new structure of definition for each performance metric we define it for Auto. And from version 6 to version 7, here's version 6, just still show here over there. And here's the new one for version 7. You can see that there are several changes. Number 1 is, and for the old one, we don't have, for example, like some a metric identifier. And here we add a new section called a metric identifier, essentially to be consistent, because we really require a identifier. And then what we did is we talk about intended semantics, so therefore basically essentially move the description and units of representation and move into the intended semantics, because that turns out to be really intended semantics. And then of course we move up the use and applications. And then what we did was we really move a lot of essential other like technical details into essential measurement considerations. We add all those details over there. So a little bit of restructure, we feel that that's essentially the combination of the best of auto structure and versus asynchronous IPPM, and we were pretty happy about it. But of course, we're more than happy to really take any comments or suggestions on this part. Next slide, please. So basically here is, let me really go over a little bit about the performance metrics we finalized and we define in this document. And here, as you can see that essentially it can be grouped into essentially 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 categories. And category 1 is mostly about the delays and one-way delay, round-trip delay, and packet delay, delay variations. Sometimes they call it jitter. So therefore, if we have to strongly that we should call it jitter, we will call it jitter at this moment, and we follow IPPM, we call it packet delay variation. And you have hop count, and you have packet loss, and you have throughput, maximum reserve bandwidth, and residual bandwidth. Essentially, it can essentially classify into 4 types. And here is, let me really clarify, and one thing we really clarified is we talk about for all these kind of essential delays, is a single JSON number conforming to section 6 of RFC 7289. I believe we were using 7159, and I believe now 8259 has replaced 7159, so therefore we changed it to this new version. And we added that it must be a non-negative number and unit must be millisecond, for example. And hop count is easy. We indicate the number must be integer and non-negative. And packet loss essentially is percentage and value represent and so on. If you notice one change is now we used to say the percentage must be integer, we remove it because essentially we look at some examples, realize no, integers will be not good enough. So therefore, basically change it to be must be non-negative. It's no longer integer over there. Hop count, of course, still must be integer. And bandwidth, again, we change to 8259, and number must be non-negative, and unit is megabits per second. And I do want to mention a couple issues, and which I think if people want to comment, and will be more than welcome to give a comment. For example, one suggestion discussed among all the authors is we don't adopt eventually, but suggested is, for example, can we use an infinite number? So basically, for example, if you go to IEEE, eventually there's a number called NAA, not a number. For example, and imagine, for example, why it is useful for the use case is one-way delay, round-trip time, and so on. Oftentimes, you can say if it is disconnected, what's the delay? It's really a giant number, the maximum possible value, or whatever, 2 to the whatever, 100 power, and so on. Or maybe eventually it should really be just infinity. Suppose it is disconnected. So some authors feel very strongly that we should really say essentially its number should be not a number, essentially called positive infinity. Or some other authors say, no, that's too complex and adds a lot of passing complexity and so on. So for the current version, and we did not really take this suggestion, but if you feel strongly, and for people from IPPM, and if you strongly or whatever, and probably we want to hear your opinion. And the second actually thing also debated quite a lot, or actually discussed a lot among our co-authors is, right now essentially is we pick a fixed unit. For example, here is we pick a millisecond, here we pick a megabits per second. They might be slightly not future proof. For example, eventually, the base value will no longer be megabits per second. And for example, eventually we go to like everything like gigabits per second. Eventually the numbers become obvious very, very large. For example, the minimum like 1,000. So the suggestion is, why don't you, for example, make it into like a megabits per second and kilobits per second, gigabits per second, TBP per second, and so on, eventually become beautiful, a little bit easier to read and so on. And latency also become millisecond and second and so on. And eventually the decision is, no, let's pick a single one, and essentially you always have single number, and unit will be defined by the protocol and not really defined by the payload itself. So those are two suggestions. We did not take. I think they are minor, but we do more than happy to take any working group opinions. Should I wait here for the comment, or I should move on?
Yeah, no, we can wait. I mean, I see also Alice in the room. Maybe he has some comments he wants to make, or other people. I just, from my perspective as chair, is we wanted to get clarification from the experts in the IETF that the metrics we are proposing here are not controversial. Right?
Yes.
And maybe just to reiterate why they could be controversial, ALTO is not supposed to be used on on a short interval, but only periodically. So all the values you're proposing here would be averages and something, yes. Right? So the semantics might not be 100% clear, and that's why we want a clarification. But if the IETF experts agree that this is something we can do, and it makes sense. I mean, surely these values are useful, right?
Yes,
there are many use cases where you could use these, where it would be very beneficial to applications if they could get these values via ALTO. I mean, from the top of my head, I can imagine 20 use cases why it would be useful.
Yes.
So for us, it's more well, not a process, an expertise issue, or IETF general guideline issue.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Great.
So, right, as a chair. Speaking as a chair.
Hi, I'm Al Morton. I'm not a chair, at least for IPPM. But I'm trying to catch up with this quickly. I got an
Sure.
email this morning.
Yeah, we did.
I did manage to show up at the right time.
Correct.
Let me first ask, are these active measurements in that they generate synthetic traffic? And
I'll talk about that. Basically, this moment, semantics will be defined, essentially will be defined, conveyed by because auto essentially can be customized, and essentially I want to go to that part of the details, and potential and the semantics could be essentially, I'll show you actually, for example, the average number, and could come from derived results, or could come, for example, packet pair, and to measure, for example, throughput and so on, and could come essentially, for example, some kind of measurement. So may be active or maybe passive.
Okay. So all the IPPM metric references are strictly, according to RFC 7799, they're active methods of measurement.
Yeah.
And because the metric definitions take advantage of that, we also call them active metrics.
Correct.
When you talk about doing something else like passive or the hybrid categories that we defined, that's going to be a little different for the metric definitions then. So there's some forms of mismatch emerging in the in going beyond the active synthetic measurement traffic.
Can you hold on? Yeah, I think that's one wonderful comment. I'll go to that part, and basically you'll see that, for example, if I may just react very quickly, it would be, for example, right now, for example, even in one project where we're deploying the system is right now, for example, one train is now even given, it's not active. I don't know if you call it active or passive. For example, right now with a lot of SDN, for example, switches nowadays is you can even do the measurements passively by monitoring the traffic itself. You don't really inject, for example, probing pulse on or periodical. Now, right now, just kind of even like right now newer capabilities. Therefore, I don't even call active or passive. Basically, we can collect those numbers and try to return, for example, report them. For example, I think that's probably start to really blur boundary a little bit.
Well, I think we've got the full taxonomy described in RFC 7799. So I think that's what I'd suggest, that you take a look at that.
Sure.
And then that'll help the
Absolutely
determining the applicability of the IPPM metrics that we've written. Now,
sure.
Now
I'm going to actually show IPPM slides, and which I'm going to discuss with you guys, and how we want to build on top. We don't want, well, you'll see. But this moment, and I think.
Yeah. Okay. So
you'll see.
The other thing I'm interested in is that I see you've got a registry going here.
Yes, we did.
And we're also about to finish up a registry for performance.
Yeah, the IPPM initial registry,
the initial contents,
yes.
But also all the registry design.
Yes.
And this took way too long, but that means that it had lots and lots of input. And it supposedly covers both active and passive measurements described in different parts of the IETF. People are already using it, and as we approached the last call, that was some of the good surprises. People are out there basically using the registry and had some feedback on that.
I'll show you. I'm going to show yours.
Yeah. So
I
imagine there's ways to put these things together, but we're going to go ahead with the registry that we planned, and and it's got lots of detail in there on some active and passive metrics.
Yeah, definitely.
So, sorry, Maria. Just from my understanding, you can go. My understanding is that our alto performance metrics document will refer to metrics you have been defining. So the semantics should be then crystal clear.
The semantic. Well, I want to go to that part. Can you just hold? I do want to show also discussions.
So one wrinkle on that, Jan, is that the IP performance metrics specifications deliberately left parameters, input factors available, and by changing those input factors, you can get very different measurements in the end.
Right.
The purpose of the registry, in our mind, the performance metrics registry, was to narrow those down a bit where we could. There are certain runtime parameters that you shouldn't nail down, like the source address and destination address, obviously. But others,
traffic pattern, for example, periodical, power zone, all those stuff.
Yeah. Those are the kinds of things that in order to get comparable results, that's our goal. We nailed a lot of the flexibility of the original IPPM metrics down. So it really sounds as though, in some sense, this should be referring to metrics that go into the registry as opposed to the broad IPPM definitions, if you want to get comparable results.
Yeah, yes.
I think we need to move this ahead because
Yeah,
we're already
sorry.
eating into Sabine's time.
Sorry, it's not yet.
Yeah,
When you
but
send me
there's
an
some
email,
part-
I show up and
But
talk.
no,
Thank you.
I would
I want you.
actually say this is very important that we're having this discussion. And for a long time, we were not sure how to move this ahead. So we thank you, Ed, for being here. And for me, this was very useful.
Yes,
Absolutely.
So-
Right. I'm going to go that part. Mia, you want to give a quick comment before I go that part quickly?
Mia Kulevin, I have a very similar question because I still don't understand how this finally would work, because Jan, you said this is really useful metrics, but those metrics are only useful if you actually have data that is current, right? Ideally you would need to know what is my jitter right now, right? Because these values can change. So what's the intent or the idea here about when you would actually measure those data, or how static are the data? How often is it?
Oh, okay. I think the short answer is the following. Of course, we define the product. Short answer is the intended use case is people initially retrieve, for example, from custom app or endpoint cost service, and then subscribe, for example, using SSE, so therefore it can get pushed to whatever interval they really subscribe to it. For example, it could be pushed. I don't know how much will get pushed back from IETF. Basically, the potential could be pushed by essentially like a SSE, essentially probably in some kind of real time. Of course, we could also, for example, update in, I believe, for example, I wish I would show you both Sprint and AT&T show their performance numbers. Typically, they update every 15 minutes, for example.
Okay, but 15 minutes, my throughput will vary.
Correct. Right. For example, throughput, available
right?
bandwidth is probably totally gone. But the probably average latency probably, like a propagation delay probably will not change unless, for example, there's some kind of, for example, link failure and you do rerouting. So for that case, you probably will be pushed.
So, but just to confirm, when you say real time, you mean 15 minutes and not once per millisecond, right?
Of course not. We are not planning for that. Of course, if we really do that, we cannot prevent it. But the intention is much longer time scale.
So I actually doubt that all of these metrics are useful in such a time frame, like 15 minutes or more. And more important is that you actually make clear what you mean in the draft.
Sure.
Because Al was automatically assuming you do a fresh measurement and that's what you report, but that's not what you're doing. So instead of, maybe you should want even to rename some of the metrics because the names are used in this measurement world this way. And what you rather, in some cases, you might actually get static values, right? You measure your hop count once and then you know the topology and you will never ever re-evaluate this. Or somebody configures it once and it is there, right?
Yeah.
So hop count is not critical. We're talking about other ones.
No, but
so hop count is the one we all agree on. Is
that's the point, because
well,
hop
hop
count is a static value, and other values might change more dynamically. If you ask for these values, you just don't know what you have to expect. And if you don't know what to expect, if you don't know how people generated these values, they are not useful at all, because then you don't know how fresh the information is and what to do with it. Right.
Correct.
And so about some of these metrics, even so they would be super useful if you would have live information, they might be completely not useful if you don't have the live information. So it's actually a little bit dangerous to put them in a document.
But we all agree we don't want Alto for live information.
No.
So we agree on that.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
So we agree on that.
Yeah.
So that's out of the question. So the question is then, are there use cases where if it's not live information and you're not 100% sure when this was measured, if it's still useful for you?
Yeah. For example, you're
There are
picking.
some, I think.
You're picking.
So there are
Many-
some, but I'm not sure if all of them are
Right.
Sure.
in this
Yeah.
category.
Yeah.
So I mean, what you also could do is maybe reduce to a minimum set right now, and then add other metrics later on when you actually see there's a need for it, right?
Sure. Yeah, we do have several use cases, and we can talk about that and see which one would be minimum. Can we just?
I think we probably need to wrap it up, but because this discussion has focused on the metrics, maybe you go to the metric slide.
Yeah. So can you just go? I think I can tell where to stop. So basically, you can skip this part. Well, actually, yes. So actually, this is really probably one important slide. So basically, left-hand side is all the essential metrics, and we have defined. And right-hand side is, by the way, that's really a discussion issue, which we really want to discuss, is the consistency and reusability. And because basically what we want is reuse as much as possible and be consistent as much as possible between Alto and also IPPM. And for people who don't know, for example, the IPPM and yet or have read the newest version, and here essentially is the list of the current metrics defined by IPPM. For example, round trip delay and user IP management for for UDP using periodical traffic. And here's the delay, for example, passive, and you learn by TCP and so on. So essentially, they're all defined in IPPM. Next slide, please. So basically, what we want is this moment is we really need to make a decision and really essentially finalize a few final wording. And basically, what we understand is central discussion with the author, and now we want really open discussion with IPPR is following. We feel the IPPM metrics mostly are for infrastructure management, and typical underlying network technology will be aware. For example, the TCP is UDP and this kind of essential technology and so on. And auto metrics tended to be more for applications. For example, it should be really technology transparent. If you really don't care, it's using IP, it's using MPLS, and maybe using, for example, and all kinds of things. Essentially, what we want is user wants somehow slightly technology neutral, kind of like a higher level abstractions. Can you go next slide quickly, please? So basically, for example, some kind of like inspiration we talk about and so on is, for example, here is the data which is posted by Sprint, and they talk about all kind of performance metrics. For example, they talk about their I don't know if people can read. Essentially, they post the average latency on public website. They will talk about, for example, what's the average latency, 3556 millisecond in this month. And basically, if you go from where to here, oftentimes still this is very like a coarse grain and still very useful. And they talk about what's the typical loss rate and so on. And next slide, please. So here,
you want to comment now?
Oh.
Yes, because you kind of said this already, you want protocol independent, but it can depend strongly what the results will be depending on what protocol you use to measure it, right?
Which is hold on one second. I'll show you what a slightly also discussion will look like. Just like 1 minute. Oh, okay. Oh, please.
Al Morton, their IP performance metrics are aware that there's IP connectivity.
Yes.
That's it.
Okay. Yes.
So I kind of disagree with your slide and the categorization you're making there.
Sure. Okay. So basically, you want to say it's more generic IP. That's totally fine. So basically here, of course, that's also Sprint result, and you display essentially all the results, and for all the people see what kind of SLA, you can really figure out somehow if you want to pick a peer, pick a replicate, and so on. Somehow you can use and so on. Next slide, please. So here is, I'm just showing very roughly. For example, here is potential numbers posted by AT&T, I believe. And this is really from AT&T number. You can see, for example, latency is 30.9 milliseconds and so on. And here essentially show all kind of latencies for every peers and so on. Essentially, there are large scale measurements and posted by AT&T and so on. So basically, what we want is this kind of like a really high level, if possible, high level kind of data to really essentially. So, if you really compare, you should really probably link to, for example, Europe and versus, for example, North America and so on. Basically, they can really be relatively stable and so on. Next slide, please. So those are use cases which we were trying to clarify. So basically, what we want is following, and I'll be very quickly, and we can open the discussion. So what do we want? Many levels of reliability consistency. One is we base auto metrics on IPPM metrics directory, and that's it. We just use the username, use all the for example, exact same name, except one. Essentially, we serve it as some kind of like a transport protocol, just like we did for CDNI. And there's some discard. Another one is we really want to do it kind of some like abstraction and so on. And for example, why we want abstraction? We don't want to be fully based on it. For example, right now the current IPPM depends on, for example, UDP, TCP, and so on. And if you really follow trend, eventually now the major trend in a lot of networking to become application aware. For example, basically probably should not be distinguished, for example, by TCP, UDP, and probably really become, for example, essential like an open flow, what's the match condition? And for this match condition, and less latency, for that match condition, that latency eventually becomes a lot more like generic, flexible, and so on. So for that sense, it's more application aware. For that case, maybe we only be consistent on the same ID as much as possible. And same metric unit, for example, even already here was slightly different. For example, IPPM, remember latency using like a second or using a millisecond and so on. We'll be more than happy to really discuss about to be consistent in as much as possible. Next slide. I think I'm almost done with this part. So basically, next slide. So what we want essentially moving forward is the following. And one possibility, if people really feel less okay, and of course, I think it would be, we talked about it yesterday and all this also discussion with several other people as well, like Bernie and so on, is one way is we make it to be really application layer performance depends on, and basically, for example, oftentimes is for a network. You probably don't really care about TCP, UDP, and oftentimes you care about what kind of treatment you really get. For example, maybe really the networking really doesn't distinguish between TCP, UDP performance. Maybe really distinguish only on, for example, this is my gold customer, this is my silver customer, and so on. So oftentimes you will get different, for example, latencies, different jitter, and so on. So therefore, we probably really should metric and in a high-level pass with, oh, your application one and which kind of category you really have belong and class belong, and then we give you essential the high-level performance where we can really pick. And then distinction reflecting the categories, label the categories, and depending on application behaviors and essential propagation delays, for example, really doesn't depend on any application behaviors at all. Or maybe, for example, I think that's one potential way move forward. Can you go to the last slide? I think we're done. Great. So basically, we want to discuss with all these IPPM and make a final decision. And essentially would be what kind of metrics we really export. I think Mia's suggestion, we probably should pick a minimal set. And we also really need to finalize the timing, essentially finalize essentially the naming IDs of all the metrics. And then we want to really finish this thing. Go ahead.
So yeah, more comments please on the mic, but as a chair, I see some skepticism in the room. And one suggestion that Mirja made was focus on a minimal set of metrics to move this ahead. And since we are lagging behind with our milestones, that might be an option, because the other option I see is having lengthy discussions that go on and on and on.
Right.
Right.
One way, basically, one way, let me just finally come with.
Whatever that minimum subset is, I'm not sure, but
right. The minimum subset, one thing is very simple, is we use very generic definition. Basically, I think would be probably some kind of agreement between the auto server and auto client. So we use very generic latency and all this stuff. Basically, essentially, all the users will be essentially very likely to be authorized already, for example, authenticated. So therefore, information might be that's a really simple way we define generic one. We don't really go down the rabbit hole of defining what's the right green to really talk about metrics. But eventually, right now, the meter trend is metric really become essentially very, very flexible based on all this match action from open flow to P4 becomes so fine grained. And eventually probably become less, probably very, very difficult path to go down. We just define some very generic classes. Okay, here's current best effort, and here are the propagation latency, and here essentially those kind of very simple things. Therefore, we don't really go down this kind of like a fine grain of application distinction. I think that's probably the easy way out, and still probably will be very, very useful in terms of high-level thing. And low-level thing is we probably can try to discuss a little bit which metrics we probably don't really. If it's too dynamic, too hard to handle, we probably can just trim down a little bit. I think those are the two things I can try to offer.
Yeah, I've been trying to think a little bit more in detail how that would actually work, right? Like you said, 15 minutes, whatever, that's the random value. But like, you know, would it actually mean that I kind of send measurement traffic every 15 minutes to kind of basically every endpoint? Like, you know, if requested, I could send this to every endpoint on the internet, right?
No, you don't do that. You don't do it. Right,
Yeah.
right.
So
I have to maybe one reminder also for Al, important to know, the goal of the ALTO protocol is to provide better than random pure
Yeah.
selection. That was phrased intentionally because we don't want to give precise information, just better than random.
Yeah.
So, and just to keep in mind that this is what we are doing
here.
here. So, we are not giving precise information. That was never the goal also of the original ALTO protocol. It's better than random. So,
But this is kind of where we're getting here. It
does
gets
it
more.
become random? Is it still random? Is what you're saying?
It's getting more and more
I get you.
precise, and
Right.
and as long as you have a source where you can access some data, and you don't have to do active measurements, that's kind of useful. But given, like as I said, given that the one who consumes the data then never really knows how this data was generated, it's less useful, because
Sure.
if you don't really know what the data means, it doesn't help you, right?
Yeah, but it could still be better than random.
Yeah, but then okay, let me propose something. I think it would probably more sense, for example, to just say this is probably a high or a low loss link, right, on this level, rather than trying to give any kind of number.
Sure. For example, right now, the one metric we're using like a cost, like a routing cost. So basically, you're saying somehow, because we do actually introduce one thing called essentially it's numerical versus ordinal. So you're saying maybe one way really is, for example, here just a random ranking. Basically, the cost metric is essentially latency, but somehow mostly focused on the ordinal part, which is like this is higher latency, lower latency, and so on, as discretized a little bit. Oftentimes, one way you want to really reduce the damping, you want to dampen the dynamic process, you essentially do some kind of like a categorization, essentially do the different like rounding levels. That probably can also help.
That would make much more sense for me.
Right.
Al Morton, here's a suggestion. Delay is more than 2 times the the airline city distance. When you measure it, And that's, that's something that users might want to know 2 times, 3 times, 5 times, something like that.
Sure.
That's something that, can be, briefly assessed on the network, and it's mostly about routing. It's not about propagation.
And that, by the way, is in the spirit of the original Alto idea, not give precise information, but something that is useful for the application, but still also doesn't disclose too much internals of the ISP, right? This is our Alto.
Right.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Keep saying that, Jan. and the other thing is to you don't need to go to the application layer to say things like this. I saw you moving up the stack there for a moment. Don't bother. Just, make some measurements and do the best you can with it in broad categories. I think that's the way to go.
Okay, but let's really hear.
Thank you.
Sabine, I think we would like to wrap it up, or you want to have a comment, or you?
Just a quick comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, one of the very goals of Sabine here, one of the very goals of Alto is decision making, which endpoint to select. And so one option that was discussed is also, instead of displaying very accurate measurements, if this is too complicated or not available, we can also advertise a score, like between 1 and 20. If you want to compare one option.
I think that was
ordinal values.
Ordinal value. Essentially, give something a score, you normalize in some way and discretize it. There are many ways to.
I think we summed this up. From a chair perspective, this was a very good discussion. I think it brought us forward, but the process is pretty clear. This one needs another round.
Probably, yes,
that's pretty clear.
Well, that's a clear plus.
Let's we stop at that. Richard, I think you and the co-authors need to have maybe some mailing this discussion. Keep Mirja and Al in the loop that we can come to an agreement, and then you need to reiterate this one.
Sounds great.
Right?
Yeah.
You agree, right?
Yep. I think there is some discussion on the list needed for this. Sabine, I think you're up next, but your time has been massively eaten into. So my suggestion would be to don't worry about the changes between the drafts. Just focus on, if you think it's ready to send out of the working group or not.
Yes, definitely. I won't spend so much time about the diffs. They are pretty minor. I'll focus actually on the first slide, which is the status on the draft, where we stand. So since last year, so there was the first ISG review with 2 discusses. The one was immediately solved. It was about the IPR. The other one was some discuss about the design that was solved for the previous IETF. So we can go to next slide. So the current status is active. So we discussed a couple of things in Prague, and so this is the timeline. So there was a last working group, last call that ended this last Sunday. So next slide. So since Prague, there has been an update that addresses Mirja and Jan's recommendation about clarifying the issue about JSON encoding, and there was also a review sent by Vijay. So next slide, please. So regarding the encoding format, the issue was that the base protocol refers to JSON and RFC 8259 that obsoletes, the Alto calendar refers to an RFC about JSON formats that obsoletes the one that was used by the Alto base protocol. So after discussion, we did find that there is no extension of Alto that really is tied to using UTF-16 or 32 for encoding. So basically, this point is addressed in the new version in section 7. Next slide. So this in this section, we explain that we now use the new JSON format encoding, UTF-8, because this allows better interoperation. And so I modified the text there, and I sent email to Adam Roach to have his feedback. So about the formulation. So next slide, please. So then we had a review sent by Vijay. So there was a thorough edit session that was necessary, especially to clarify the text and short and long sentences, clarify some things. And also a question about the content length field in HTTP examples. So because in the draft, there are elucidation, such as like, such as this one. Okay. And it was not clear in the text whether the content length field was accounting for such elucidation. The next slide, please. So the answer is yes. Actually, this file does account for the real number of corresponding to these elucidations. So it explains that, it explains this. There was also a rephrasing where to clarify some text in a rule, and where I added a must. And so next slide, please. So there is a second working group last call, as I said, that just ended. So with the chair's comment, saying that Ben indicated a couple of edge cases, he put a discuss item that was solved in the version 10. And there was also that IPR issue that was solved. So I also received some working group feedback on suggesting on spelling consistency. So I tried to I will try to chase them, but well, I think, well, in my point of view, the draft is ready.
So from the working group point of view, there was a couple of folks that reviewed it, Kai and Jensen, I believe. I'll go through one more review, and then we'll push it out of the working group towards IESG. And that should happen probably in the couple weeks, or maybe the week following the end of the IETF.
Okay.
Right.
But essentially, it's done.
It's done, yeah. So if anybody has anything, post now, or we will push it out for sure in the next 2 weeks. All right, thank you. Okay, Jensen.
Unified properties.
Unified properties.
Yes. Okay, take it. It's better. Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you. So I'm Jensen. We'll talk about the update of the unified properties today. It's a major auto extensions, and because currently a patch vector and FCA and some other document, the working group document depend on it. And so next slide, please. Thank you. And in the last few months, actually, our courses and some other working members have a lot of discussion about how to better clarify the unified property design. So actually, in this revision, we make some major updates on the document organizations and better clarify the requirements and the concepts and the design scope. But actually, the specification is not too much modified. We just make some slight modification. Yeah, so in this revision, we clarify the unified property extension. Actually, for the client side, the client has 3 major requirements. The first one is client may want to obtain the properties of the generic entity, which is a missing part in the current auto framework. For example, there are some other generic entities like the not just the endpoint like the PID, the AIS and country, and in the path vector we introduce a object network element. So all this may have the properties the client want to query. And second requirement is that when query these properties of the entities, we don't want to introduce any message redundancy. And third one is for some entity properties, the server may want to provide a format, and the client can just get a format. So it's a very straightforward solution. In the very early revision of the document we already introduced, it's just introduce a get more property map service to solve this. So in the next slides, I will clarify. So for the first requirement, what we need to do for the design. So actually, for the first requirement, the auto client should have the answer to the following questions. The first one is what entities can auto client queries, and second one is for each entity, what properties can auto client query. So that's the two major requirements, the questions for the client. So next please. Yeah. So first, for the first questions, our basic idea is because in our previous document revision, our design basic idea is the auto server just announce a set of types, and each type refers to the entities of the same semantics and specified ID format. For example, the IPv4 type will means the entities is an IPv4 address of an endpoint, and they have the identifier with the IPv4 address format, and we consider an entity is valid if its identifier is valid. So each type will define a complete entity site, and which consists of all the valid entities. So by announce a type, the auto client can know. So it can query entities in the other entities in this complete entity site, which be announced. So so next page, yeah. But there's an issue that because not all the valid entities are meaningful. So what's the meaningful? We give an example. So the PID defined by the auto framework, a PID is only meaningful in a network map. So there's a lot of valid PID names, but the auto server only define the properties for a subset of this complete PID name site. So which is associated to some network maps. So for a given, when we observe that for a given entity type, an auto information resource so only contains a subset of the complete entity site. So which we refer this subset as a resource specific entity domain. So that's our solution change it to we allow the server announce a set of resource specific entity domain, more specific for the client to query the entities. So next page. So however, just using the entity ID we defined previously to identify these entities may be ambiguous. So because the client or server need to distinguish which entity domain an entity belongs to. So for example, we have two PID ones in the network map and the network map 2. They define two different PIDs. Which means they may have the same properties, ASN, the AS number, but in the different network maps, actually they have the different AS number values. So to distinguish them, we use the entity domain names, column the domain specific entity ID to identify each entities. So here, for example, the entity domain names can be the network map 1.pid, or the network map 2.pid, and the PID1 is just a domain specific entity ID. And we use the network map 1.pid column PID1 to identify It's the PID in the network map 1. So next page. So we revise the second question is we don't need to answer each entities what properties can query, the auto client can query. So we just ask for each resource specific entity domain. So which properties the auto client can query. So we have the basic idea is the auto server just announce a set of resource specific entity domain to a property type mapping. So next page. But however, for the entity domain in the resource specific entity, for example, we call the rif.di. So the mapping is a property of property type PO may be ambiguities. So we give an example. The network1.ipv4 to the PID properties. The PID, the value of these PID properties may be defined by either the network map 1 or just the current property map itself. And we need to distinguish them. So the UP design formulates the mapping as the ri.di to the ro.po. So here the ro is either the resource ri or just this. And so the server can just announce two different mappings to distinguish who provides this property widers. But in the RFC 7285, the auto framework, the auto protocol, so this is not a reverse word for the resource ID. So we just use the .po to represent this .po. Some working member propose maybe we can just use the PO without the dot characters, but it's just a minor improvement. We can disable if you we don't have a stronger idea about it. We can I don't know. We want to discuss about later about it, or we can just move forward. Go ahead. Sure. So currently we make the design clarification as each property map just provides a set of the ri.di to the r.po mappings, and this mapping should be announced in the property map. And so here are 4 cases for the mappings defined, but we only consider so far only 3 mapping modes are meaningful. So we call the export mode, which means, for example, the network map 1 can map a IPv4 entity to a PID properties, and extend mode, a PID defined by a network map 1, and the present property map resource extend and geolocation properties on this PID. Or the property map just define new IPv4 address and define a new probably like the AS number on this IP address. So that's the scope of our design. So next page. Based on this, but not the arbitrary ri.di to r.po mappings are meaningful. So we need to guarantee the announced mappings should be meaningful. So what's the meaning of the? So we give some example. The meaningful means the DI must be supported by the resource RI. So here is the bad example. So which means the network map 1.asn is not meaningful because the client don't know what's the ASN defined by the network map. And in the export working mode, the DI to PO mapping must be supported by the resource RO. So we give another bad example. It's the network map 1.ipv4 to the network map 1.asn is not meaningful because the client don't know what's the ASN defined by a network map 1 for and the property for the IPv4. So to give the meaningful announcement mapping. So we just introduce some additional registries in this the new document revisions. So for each auto information resource type, which is indicated by the media type, we define resource specific entity domain as per registry and the entity property mapping as per registry. So next page will show an example. We use a network map as an example. So for a network map resource, so it can support the IPv4, IPv6, or PID entity domain types, and it can export the IPv4 to a PID properties or the IPv6 to a PID properties. So that's the initial registry, and maybe some other in the future we have the extension we can extend these registries. So next page. So our protocol specification update the IRD from the previous that is a set of a cross product of the set of entity domains and the set of properties to a set of mapping. I think it's more convincing. And so next page. So for the request response schema, we don't have any change, but we clarify the client only just still requests the cross product of the entities, a set of entity and the properties, but the server will ignore the mapping which is not announced in the IRD. So next page. Well, so for the second requirement is more like the improvement for the current design, because the current design may introduce some redundancy. We identify two cases of the redundancies. One is the request entities may be redundant, and the return entities may be redundant. And the next page will show an example. So for the first case, because the property map may announce a network map 1.IPv4 to the HPID, and may also announce another network map 2.IPv4 to PID. But if a client want to query the IP address for both these PID properties defined by the two different network map, in the current design, it have to query two individual entity identifiers. So it's redundant. So we introduce the next page. We introduce the improvement solution. It's we allow the property map just to use the entity domain type map to a set of the properties, which present the equivalent entity property mappings to both. But the client can just query a single entity identifiers to get both two different properties defined by the different mappings. Yeah. Next page, we show here is the example. If we use such a design, we can revise the IRD to a more compact representation. And next page. So for the second issue, actually, very early revision already identified it. It's for some type of entities, for example, the IPv4 entities, actually, maybe all the IPv4 addresses in same CIDR may have the same property values, such as the AS numbers. But to obtain the AS number for all of these IPv4 entities, the current design, the client have to enumerate all the individual IP addresses in this CIDR. So next page, the unified properties introduce the hierarchy and inheritance approach, which means we can define entity block representation for some types of entities. For example, the CIDR can be a entity block representation for the IPv4 addresses, and the UP can define the property inheritance rules on the entity block representation. Okay, that's I think that's a last design point. Yeah, and the next page. Yeah, but in this revision, we make some clarification that the property inheritance must not be ambiguity. So make some enforcement like for given entity types, if it's entity block representation is defined, the representation must be hierarchical. And in other words, it cannot be partially intersected. So we give a bad example, like if we define the E1, the entity block E1, it's a 192.star.star1. Another entity block is a 192.0.star.star. So they have the different ASN properties. So the client cannot know what's the ASN properties for the IP address in their interception side. So they will introduce some ambiguity, and the property inheritance rule should avoid these ambiguities. So next page we make some conclusion for our current document revision, and I hope it's clear to better clarify our current UP design, and if we can, next page, if we can move this document to the working group call after the meeting.
So how many people have read version 8 of the document? All right. So I think, given that the authors feel that this work is ready for working group last call, I think just to be conservative, it'll be nice if at least a couple of people can first read version 8, post their comments, and then we would like to go for a working group last call. Now, it could be that if the comments are deep enough and, reasonable enough, they could serve as a working group last call. But at least the chairs feel right now to try to take a hump for working group last call seems a little premature since nobody has read it. So can somebody volunteer to read it? We can start picking victims. Awesome.
Okay.
Oh, sure.
Thank you. We have
Thank you.
2 volunteers. Thank you both.
Maybe you give your names to the note taker, or go to the mic and say, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm the
note
taker.
taker is Jensen. So-
Yeah, right. So then we have it also on the recording.
Luis Contreras from Telefónica.
Okay,
Excellent.
thank you.
Thank you.
Farney Boughton from Sprint.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. That would be very, very good. And then we can move ahead depending on the comments.
Yeah.
But still, I think from a chair perspective, this is then ready for being sent out. We just want to make sure that, we get a review done. But you basically resolved all the technical issues, correct?
Yeah.
Correct. So, but that brings us back up the question, do we want to do a working class call for path vector because all the dependencies have been resolved, or do we want to, well, we should then wait on the comments, I guess, because they have a high dependency.
Yeah, so Richard, yeah. So yeah, basically, I think, I can speak back, actually speak slowly, and it would be, right. So I think probably the right thing to do is wait until people feel comfortable about unified properties, because path vector does indeed invoke it. So therefore, they should just somehow
Should
come
wait
together
for the
always.
comments. Yes, I agree.
Jiao Zhang says that I will read the draft and post comments as well.
Great.
I agree.
Good. Thank you for all of those that volunteered. Then,
So next one is a CDI. Yeah, it should be quick, and because we think it's almost ready. Just from next page. So in the latest revision for the CDI FCA document, the major changes about the actually just some minor improvements, change the naming and the improve the wordings and update examples and specification to matching the latest UP document and the SIC document also, and make some clarification on the protocol error handling and revise the example. So next page is I will quickly go over the revisit. If you remember, we posed two remaining issues for the last in the last item meeting for the FCA document. It's the first issue is we think the CDI FCI is not a key-value store format, and the key-value store format because in the auto protocols, the map service look like the store format like the network map service and cost map service, but the CDI FCI object defined by the FCA S108 and S106 is not a key-value store. So, but we still keep the message schema. We not change the protocol specification. But we rename the CDI FCI map service to just the CDI FCI service in the latest document. And for the second issue, it's that do we want to allow the query by the not only by the footprint and only by the capabilities? We can query by joint footprint and capability queries, but in the working we don't have any strong opinion to allow this use case. So currently we just do not address it, and if people have some strong opinions, they can propose another extension if necessary. So in the next page, we did such renaming, and in the go over all the whole document and rename such map service to it just called the service, yeah, in the both media tab and the data format. So next page, it's also rename the new footprint type from the auto network map to the auto PID because it's more convincing. It means the footprint value in such a type is a PID defined by an auto network map. And next page, it's because the CDI FCI also use the property map to better provide the client can query the capabilities by the footprint. So we just update the example to use the latest design of the property map from I mentioned is from the cross product capabilities to the set of mapping. Yeah. So next page is the update, the example update in the request and the response. So next page, we show the example, the latest example how to use the incremental update, the SIC document to update the CDI FCI resource. But we notice that the JSON merge patch will always include the whole CDI FCI resource. So we make some clarification that it's not recommended to use the JSON merge patch to update the CDI FCI. So next page is we also make some clarification on the request process and the error handling part. So because based on the protocol errors defined in the section 5.6, the undefined capability type and values is invalid in the request, and if the client sends such a query, the server will must return an invalid failed value error. So for the we mentioned only for the valid CDNI capabilities. If the server does not define any footprint for it, so the server just omits it from the response. And the next page, it's we introduce an open discussion that shall we allow the CDNI service announce its supported CDNI capability types and values in its IRD, because in the RFC 806 and 808, in the initial IANA registry, it's only defined the, to give an example, they only define the HTTP 1.1, HTTPS 1.1 as the supported protocol values, but so maybe a new protocol type like the HTTP2 may be registered, but the point is an old Alto server may not be upgraded to support it. So which means for this old Alto server, it will consider this value it's invalid because it's not registered into the IANA registry. And in its implementation, it consider it's invalid. But for the new auto client, it will consider it's valid value. It's just maybe the auto server doesn't define the footprint for this value. So it will surprise why the server will return the invalid failed value error to this client. So if you announce the supported capability type and values, they will prevent the client from sending such a wasted request. So it's maybe just an improvement. It may not be a very necessary design, but we want to introduce such an open discussion for you. And so we think the author also think it's this document is already almost done. So I hope we can go to the working class call after the meeting.
Yes. So I'm a co-author of this, and I totally agree. So we as authors think this document is very ready.
Yeah.
As chair now, changing my hat, what we discussed yesterday also with the authors, but also previously today, is we want to involve also the CDNI working group to have a final look. Again, theoretically, there should be no issue because we're not changing the semantics of the CDNI JSON format. We're just transporting it. But just to be fair, give them a look. So what I'm thinking currently right now is I will send an email to the CDNI working group and tell them, guys, we are shortly issuing a working class call, and give them a heads up so they have more than 2 weeks, right? And it might seem a little unfair if we issue a working class call right now and just give them 2 weeks. So maybe I'll send them an email, guys, that we are finishing this, please have a look, working group class call is coming soon, we'll inform you too, and maybe also one of them can be reviewed during the working class call. So my guess is we do issue the working class call in 2 weeks or something, and I tell the CDNI, give the CDNI working group a heads up, and then we have another 2 weeks for the working class call, so they have a month to look at it. And then we ask one of their participants to review it and one of our group, and that's my plan. Yeah. And the question is, Jensen, but we can take this offline if we issue a new version in the meantime, because the last issue you had there, the IRD changes.
Yeah, you're right.
We can issue a small update in between, but I don't feel strongly about that.
Yeah, I think I'll leave it to you guys to issue a version or update or not. That change is fairly small. But again, as we look for working group here, working group last call here, and coordinate with CDNI, please, need participation from the working group list members to also review this. Assuming we get one from CDNI, we would just need at least one person from Alto working group to take a look at it from WGLC perspective. So for the notes, we're going to give 2 weeks for the draft to percolate here. We'll immediately inform CDNI that we are going to have a working group last call in 2 weeks. And then we have 2 weeks for somebody to review it internally in Alto. And then we issue a working group last call. All right. Any feedback on this? In that case, Danny, you're next. And if you can get us a couple minutes, that'll be good.
But I think overall, I think we're doing great in time. We still have 20 minutes. So maybe, Danny, you have 10 minutes, and then we have another 10 minutes for the general discussion. I think we're doing great.
Yeah, I will skip a couple of slides, maybe.
By the way, for those of you who've missed it, I forgot to mention this, actually. We had a paper on the ANRW workshop, and many of the co-authors are here. And this is very related to Danny's presentation right now. I think it's a good success also for our working group that we had a paper there and, show to the community our work. So congratulations to the authors. I should have said that
actually,
earlier.
this is a joint work with people at Yale University, Spring, Ericsson, Telefonica, Nokia. Okay, I will skip a couple of. I can use this, or you can move.
No, I can use it to point.
Yeah. Okay. Next, please. Skip. Next. Here. We have a high-level overview about the key ALTO mechanisms and abstractions. In particular, ALTO provides different mechanisms, such as information resource directory to provide a list of available information resources. ALTO provides an info consistency in order to allow specify a dependency between different information resources, and an information update model to string control, push, and incremental update of the information resources. ALTO also introduces a set of abstraction modules, such as the network map or cost map, to provide a network location grouping cost between them. The patch vector abstraction to provide a more detailed routing information using abstract network elements, and the the capability maps, such as the unified property maps or the proofreading capabilities. Next, please. Yeah, here basically we have the an overview about the all ALTO documents. In the last column, I am including some potential topics under discussion to be addressed, such as extension for new architectures, extension for new settings, and ALTO survey, in order to try to summarize the current ALTO implementation in real use cases scenarios, etc. Okay, next. So basically, currently, many multi-domain use cases are emerging with the development of new technologies such as SDN, NFV, 5G. Example of such use cases including the multi-domain collaborative data science, multi-domain service function chaining, flexible interdomain routing control. In the past few ALTO IETF meetings, different drafts were submitted summarizing the experience on developing multi-domain application using ALTO. Here we have an incomplete list of them. Next, please. So here, basically, we have a couple of examples of premier scientific experiments, the Large Hadron Collider and Square Kilometric Array. Such experiments push scientific discovery boundaries and rely on workflows that coordinate geographically distributed resources. Next, please. Here we have the movement of the data from the LHC tier 0 to tier 1 and tier 2. Basically, this science network, like with multiple domains, with heterogeneous resources to run multiple different applications or jobs. So the key requirement in this type of distributed workflow is the ability to orchestrate multiple resources across multiple domains for heterogeneous applications. Next, please. Here we have the multi-domain service function chaining, where basically an end-to-end network service is often required virtual or physical network function in a specific order. Network operators start offering to the customer the possibility of configuring network service with specific requirements in terms of resources or performance. Such resources are expected to be available across different domains with different technologies or administrations. Next, please. Here we have another potential use case that try to expand the fine grained net capability of SDN from inter-domain setup to multi-domain setting to provide flexible inter-domain routing. Traditional inter-domain routing protocols are limited because they provide single path routing and limiting the client's path choices. So flexible multi-domain routing allows the user to specify routing action at the provider level with more flexible matching conditions and more choices on routes, not only currently used routes, but also available yet unused routes. Next, please. Next. Here we have a couple of key design requirements for Alto to support new multi-domain use cases. The modern use cases require information on properties and capabilities of different networks resources, including transport resources, storage resources, processing resources. And such use cases need to orchestrate multiple resources in multiple networks, so that a unified resource representation is a key requirement for multi-domain network information abstraction. And existing representation tend to focus on a single domain. In multi-domain use cases, related information can be retrieved from multiple networks to compute end-to-end information. As such, that support aggregation of multiple network into a single virtual network are another key design requirement. Next, please. Next. To solve the multi-domain we use the multi-domain abstraction to solve the application layer optimization across multiple networks. Typically, previous use case examples can be modeling as an optimization problem. F, where F is an optimization function with two types of parameters. X representing the network parameters and Y representing the application parameters. The optimization function is also subject to two types of constraints: the constraint related to the network resources and constraint related to the application resources. The lack of full acknowledgement or control over the underlying network can limit the potential values of X, for example, delay, bandwidth, packet loss, etc. Next, please. Using the multi-domain network abstraction is aimed to provide such constraint in order to solve this optimization problem. Next, please. What is the basic formulation? Basically, application interact with the network asking for to carry traffic for a set of flows. For example, here we have two flows, F1 and F2, and each flow will traverse different networks. Each flow had a set of network properties: add, delay, available bandwidth, etc. And in a multi-domain settings, a network property may involve network property of multiple component networks. For example, the delay should be the sum of the delay on each network that the flow will traverse. Next, please. So the basic idea is to provide the ability to discover, aggregate, and expose information of multiple networks to provide a single, consistent virtual network view and represent this information using a generic, compact mathematical programming constraints. Next, please. Just to give an illustrative example, here we have a single network where a user wants to reserve two circuits from source 1 to destination 1 and from source 2 to destination 2. Both circuits share common links, link 3 and link 4, so that it's not possible to reserve 100 gigabit for both circuits. Next, please. So using the mathematical programming constraint, we can generate linear inequalities to provide a compact representation of the available bandwidth of flows through a network. For example, X1 and X2 represent the available bandwidth for flow 1 and flow 2 respectively. Next, please. This resource abstraction represents the resource availability region of the network for providing resource to a set of flows. As such, some linear inequalities can be redundant. Next, please. Using the redundant inequalities can be removed using a polynomial time optimal algorithm. Next, please. So let's take the previous example from single network to multiple network. Here we have a user that want to reserve 3 circuits from source to destination 1, 2, and 3. Each network will using the mathematical programming constraint, each member network will extract the bandwidth sharing for each circuit into a set of linear inequalities. Next, please. Although each domain may already conduct redundancy optimization, there can be cross-domain redundancy. For example, the flow 2 and flow 3 in member network 3 can eliminate the flow 2 and flow 3 member network 2. Next, please. Using the multi-domain redundancy optimization, we can remove this redundancy. Next, please. Just to a reverse view, basically, the key main idea is to aggregate the extraction in multiple networks into a unified single and virtual representation. Next, please. Just to quickly summarize, multiple important multi-domain application can benefit from ALTO. However, new design requirements also emerge, and different drafts have been proposed to address some of the design requirements. As next steps, the idea is to make a systematic investigation of the deployment concept of ALTO, economic incentive, stability, scalability, privacy, security consideration, and to make a systematic design of the extension to address the design requirements. That's it. Just to mention that we have regular weekly meetings every Wednesday, 9:30 US Eastern Time. So feel free to join us. That's it. Thank you. Okay. We move.
Yeah. So I know you have a draft associated with this, and for a long time, obviously, we are not going to adopt any new drafts in the working group. But considering that this is something of interest both to the research community and perhaps to the operator community, one thing we might want to think about is moving the draft ahead as an independent AD sponsored. Okay. But we can talk about that later. Clearly, you put some work in the draft, so I think we can move it ahead if you guys are interested.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Right, yeah.
Well, so we have one more agenda item, discussion on topics beyond the working group. Richard, you want to say something or others?
Yeah, I can just go over quickly.
Yeah.
You want to go over? I can skip, that's fine too.
No, we have the time.
We have some time, so we have 5 more minutes if you want to.
Okay, I'll just go over very quickly.
Yeah.
To talk about some ongoing things which we're working on and the issues which we want to address. So,
you have slides for that?
I do.
I didn't know that.
Right. So clearly, this is just mostly trying to really define a little bit issues or items which we might want to work on, and of course, they are beyond the current working group deliverable. So therefore, they are not really in the charter and so on. And it's a result of a lot of discussions. A lot of discussion with a lot of people. And I think Danny did a wonderful job to show people about this, like regular meetings we have every Wednesday. So other people are more than welcome to join all these discussions. And I think that they're wonderful discussions. So next slide, please. So basically, at really high level, and this is beyond the current working group items, are essentially trying to address 2 issues. And one is network information abstraction for applications, basically what kind of content. So basically, we're really talking about abstraction. So therefore, what kind of abstractions and the content we should really come up. And the second one, of course, is when you have all the content and how to really carry those content from the network to the users. And that's essentially information retrieval or transport. And that's essentially the protocol part. So therefore, essentially, we're focusing on these 2 aspects. And both work will be in the context of application-aware networking. Next slide, please. And I probably can skip this one. I think most people are already familiar with. Essentially, that's an auto protocol and as a transport layer thing. And just put the slides over there for people to take a look. We have all kinds of things. I think Danny also had this like very nice picture showing essentially the bigger pictures. Next slide, please. And here is a set of abstractions which the auto working group so far has defined already. So basically, what kind of abstraction you really want abstract? You don't want to go to like details, for example, like tunnels and all the like very, very fancy like forwarding tables and so on. So here is a list of abstraction. Basically, you have nodes and you have paths, you have code flows and so on. So those are the most basic abstractions which we have introduced in the working auto working group. Next slide, please. So this one probably slightly easier to visualize about what kind of abstractions which the auto working group has introduced. And you have a bunch of nodes, entities, and I think that's a general concept. And the entities would essentially, you can really aggregate all these entities to define something called network map. And of course, then you have like either, for example, from the entities or from aggregate of entities, you can define important call services, essentially the link property. And of course, you can also get all the properties on demand. Of course, you can also have code flow, which means you really worry about set of transportations and really go together. And that's essentially called path vector. And you really have abstraction called code flow. Next slide, please. So I think we can skip this one. Those are all the current working group documents and so on. And we can skip this one. Okay. So now I do want to talk about a few ongoing efforts, which potentially can be interesting for the group. So one, of course, the item is the auto deployment. So the basic setting is very simple. It's focus, for example, this is one example of deployment. I think Danny already also mentioned is wonderful is, for example, the focus is collaborative, distributed xScale data sciences. And for example, one driving project is the project called SENSE, is SDN for end-to-end network sciences at xScale. And basically, application already planning to be supported. I think Danny mentioned LHC and stuff. And here is essentially black hole astronomy, and they really collect a huge amount of data doing all this like analytics. And one main work, I think, for example, in this current group is to solve the issue is cost services supporting, for example, time block, maximum bandwidth, bandwidth sliding window, and time bandwidth product, and so on. Basically is, and those are wonderful, wonderful test cases to see if auto can really support those use cases or not. So I think those are really would be should be one work item which I think the working group should really look into a lot of details. Can we support these kind of things? There are already a lot of adaptation and for this early part, but we really need to investigate if we can really solve these like a true use cases or not. Next slide, please. So the second one, I think the items and beyond the current deliverables would be the following item, essentially focusing on the protocol, on the transport layer. And those essentially on the top, all the green buttons, essentially they define the current transport mechanisms. For example, we have information resource directory, we have information resources and media types, and we have consistency, and we have grammar, we have all this stuff, and push notification and so on. So if you look back and you ask yourself, what kind of transport entities might be missing, and you can identify a little bit, for example, IRD with context information. I think that's one issue which Sabine has a tremendous interest and which I think would be very useful. And currently, for example, currently we have single media type. Essentially, we develop one media type for one, and more for all these consistency requirement and so on, we probably worry about multi-part information resources. I think that's another item which would be interesting. And right now, we're focusing on single JSON grammar. And maybe we should really look at, for example, like using young models as a generic, for example, grammars and so on, how much we should go down with it. And the current transport layer is using SSE, which is useful, which turns out very simple, very easy to use, and so on. But right now, for example, there will be essentially potentially new, more flexible, and more efficient transport protocol, for example, HTTP2, and those essential potential can also change our transport layer protocol. They are all potential items. Next slide, please. So here would be talk about essential all the new abstractions which we potentially should work on. I think on the left-hand side we talk about all kinds of abstraction which already mentioned briefly, but there are a lot of like entity domains beyond IPv4, IPv6, for example, like cellular and so on. All the domains which we have not defined, we probably need to define in some way. And then we should have probably more generic, unified generic code flows, multicast, multipath. We're not really dealing with them in a systematic way yet. So I think those are essential abstraction we probably should introduce. And we have FCI map. We probably really should go to the generic network capabilities and so on for all the network functions and so on. I think it'll become very useful. And currently, we only have very simple filtering capabilities. And one thing which I really have a lot of interest, which potentially can be very useful, is like network SQL language. I think that's really beyond anything which I know at IETF, which potentially can be very useful. And of course, also like generic calendar concept and so on. I think they're all very useful. Next slide, please. So of course, last one, which I want to mention about potential items which people are working on, and really I should mention is in the back end and realization. For example, even today, a lot of discussion about what kind of measurements and so on, how do we do measurements. For example, there are a lot of push in early on, for example, by Lyle and also TechFog. You should really do very query triggered measurements and collect all the data, start and collect measurements smartly and formalize protocols and really accurate. Maintain accuracy and freshness and so on, and use proxies and so on. Essentially, there are a lot of these kind of implementations and really back-end things that work, which can be very, very useful for the success of this protocol. Okay, and I believe that's all I want to say. I think I probably finished right on time.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
I think this is very interesting thoughts on what happens next to Alto. I mean, for those of you that have been with us since the inception, you know, the first idea for Alto was to just get a coarse network information to applications. When we rechartered Alto, we moved from, you know, a single computer view to what you used to call it, Richard, my network view, or?
Yeah, my network view, yes.
Right, to path vector and other things. So the next iteration of Alto, once we finish all of the documents that we have right now, some of us were thinking might very well be operations, you know, focus on Alto, but that all Alto ops, yeah.
Okay.
So, but that all depends on the energy of the working group, and once we are done with our deliverables, that's something that we can talk about at that particular IETF.
Wonderful.
Right, because what you described on the last slide is pretty much in line of that, with that, like Alto operational issues.
Right, exactly.
The provisioning interface was intentionally out of the charter for now, but you know, in an Alto operational setting, or Alto ops, that's certainly something people can work on. Yeah.
Correct. Yes.
So if there's no other comments, then thanks for being here, and we will figure out what to do in Singapore. So thank you, folks, and have a nice day.
Thank you. Thanks.
The main thing will be the performance metrics.
Right.
Basically,
So yeah, thank you, everybody. We will. We should go. I have some time. Let's
let's